When we talk about justice for the worst crimes imaginable, the kind of stuff that happens on a global scale, the story is never, ever simple. It's not just about dusty law books and courtrooms, it's about real people caught up in the gears of history. So today, we're going to dive into the messy, complicated, and often paradoxical world of international criminal law.
And let me start by asking you a question that really gets to the core of it all, one that messes with our whole idea of good guys and bad guys. Think about this. Can someone who has suffered something absolutely horrific also be responsible for doing something horrific to others? I mean, how does a justice system even begin to deal with a story that's both a tragedy and a crime?
And this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. This is a real person, Dominic Ongwen. As a little kid, he was abducted and forced to be a child soldier in a brutal rebel army. He survived, and he rose through the ranks to become a feared commander. Decades later, he was on trial and convicted of 61 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity. His story is a walking paradox, and honestly, it's the perfect way for us to get our heads around the massive challenges of international justice. All right, so here's the game plan. We're going to look at the paradox of his case, then we'll get into the global rulebook, figure out how we pinpoint who's responsible, talk about the court of last resort, what justice means for victims, and finally, why in this system there's supposed to be nowhere to hide. Okay, first up, the global rulebook. Think about it. When something like a genocide happens, it's not just an attack on one group of people or one nation. It's seen as an attack on all of us, on all of humanity. And that's exactly why a special set of laws was created to deal with it, a kind of law that stands above any single country. And that's where international criminal law, or ICL, comes in. Now, the absolute key thing you have to grasp here is that ICL is all about individuals. This isn't about putting an entire country on trial, no way. It's about holding specific people accountable for the worst of the worst crimes, genocide, war crimes, that kind of thing. So that leads to a really big question, right? If you can't just blame a whole country, then who exactly is on the hook when these terrible things happen? Well, the answer is this game-changing idea called individual criminal responsibility. And it's as simple as it is powerful. Every single person. It doesn't matter if you're a low-level soldier or a head of state, you can be held personally responsible. Your fancy title, your rank, your official position, it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
And hey, this isn't just some vague concept. It's written down black and white in the Rome Statute, which is basically the founding document for the International Court. It's super clear. You don't even have to be the one who pulled the trigger. If you ordered it, if you helped make it happen, or even just assisted, you're responsible, period.
And that brings us right back to Dominic Ongwen. The court took this exact principle and applied it to his unbelievable story. They looked at him and said, yes, we see your horrific past as a child soldier. But, and this is so crucial, that did not excuse the crimes he chose to commit as an adult commander. His past as a victim was a huge factor in his sentencing, for sure, but it didn't just erase his responsibility as a perpetrator. Okay, but what about the classic excuse, right? The leader who says, I had no idea what my people were doing. Well, international law has an answer for that. It's called command responsibility. A commander can't just stick their head in the sand. If they knew or even should have known about crimes their subordinates were committing and they did nothing to stop it, they can be held responsible too. It's the law's way of saying ignorance is no excuse. So we've got these really powerful principles, but where do they actually get enforced? A lot of people hear about the International Criminal Court, the ICC, and they kind of picture a world police force. But that's not quite right. It's probably better to think of it as the world's emergency room for justice. See, the ICC runs on this core idea called the principle of complementarity, and it is fundamental. The ICC is designed to be a court of last resort. It totally respects that countries should handle their own business. It only steps in when a country's own justice system is either unwilling or unable to do the job itself. Of course, figuring out when a country's just unwilling versus unable, well, that gets very political, very fast, and it's a huge challenge. And there's a clear process here. First, a crime is committed. The home country gets the first crack at it. Then, the ICC assesses the situation. Is that country genuinely trying to prosecute? Or is the government just protecting its own? Or maybe the court system has totally collapsed. If the answer is no, they're not really handling it, only then is the ICC allowed to step in and take over the case. But, putting a bad guy in jail is really only half the story. What about the victims? What about the communities that have been completely torn apart by these crimes?
International law is more and more focused on this idea that true justice also has to mean healing.
And this isn't just a feel-good idea. It's baked right into the Rome Statute. Article 75 gives the court the power to order reparations. And that doesn't just mean money. It's about acknowledging all the harm that was done and trying to repair it through things like compensation, rehabilitation programs, and giving back what was taken. If you want to see what this looks like, just look at the Ongwen case again. The court didn't just sentence him to prison. It also ordered collective reparations to try and help heal the communities he devastated. We're talking about things like symbolic memorials, rehab programs for survivors, and financial support, all designed to acknowledge the incredibly deep wounds left behind. Okay, so we've got individual responsibility, we've got a court, but how does the system make sure that perpetrators can't just skip town and escape justice? Well, this final piece of the puzzle is all about closing the loopholes. It's about the long arm of international law.
A key tool here is something called universal jurisdiction. It's a really powerful and sometimes controversial idea. Basically, it says that for certain crimes that are just so awful, like genocide or systematic torture, any country in the world has the right to prosecute the person who did it. It doesn't matter where the crime happened or what their passport says. It pretty much erases borders as a place to hide.
And what about the most powerful people on the planet? Well, Article 27 of the Rome Statute slams that door shut. It says flat out that your official job, whether you're a president, a prime minister, a general, is irrelevant. No one is above this law.
And these are not just theories. Back in 1961, Israel used universal jurisdiction to prosecute Adolf Eichmann, a key architect of the Holocaust. And in the 1990s, the courts in the UK ruled that the former dictator of Chile, Augusto Pinochet, did not have immunity from being prosecuted for torture. I mean, these cases sent shockwaves around the world, proving that being powerful isn't a permanent shield, even if getting countries to actually act on this is still the biggest hurdle.
So let's do a quick recap. We've got individual liability, meaning everyone's accountable, command responsibility, which holds leaders liable, complementarity, which makes the ICC the court of last resort, reparations, to focus on justice for victims, and universal jurisdiction, to make sure there are no safe havens.
Look, this whole framework for justice is truly one of the great human projects of the last 100 years. But it is constantly being tested by politics, by power, by war itself. And that leaves us with a final, really crucial question to think about. In a world that seems to be facing more conflict and division, is this system of justice, as powerful and as important as it is, actually enough?